Leanne for saying book club.
Now
Okay, now we're good. All right, Kevin, take it away. And you guys, if you don't have the floor, can you go ahead and hit mute, and that way we won't get feedback while Kevin is doing his presentation. Okay, thanks, Kevin. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled and honored to be here, and looks like a great turnout. Hopefully everyone has a drink with them, whether it's coffee, hot chocolate, maybe even a glass of wine. And I look forward to a fun dialogue with you all. And so when I went to think about putting together my book reading, I decided that grizzly bears, this charismatic megafauna, I couldn't just stand up there and read a book, which I think kind of gets very boring really quickly. So I put together a multimedia presentation. And so I'm just going to deliver the first part of that to you all with a short reading, and then that'll naturally carry us into the conversation. So we'll get started here. Share my screen. All right. Well, again, thanks for being here. And it's great to be in the company of so many bear people. But here's the thing. When I started this journey we're going to talk about today, I didn't know if I was a bear person. And I'd like to give you a few reasons why. The first reason, that ferocious bear of myth and movie. Another reason, Timothy Treadwell and Amy Huguenot killed in Katmai National Park in 2003. Now, if you get queasy at the sight of blood, you might want to avert your eyes, as we hear from Todd Orr, who was attacked by the same bear twice just outside of Ennis, Montana.
Yeah, life sucks in bear country. Just had a grizzly with 2 cubs come at me from about 80 yards, and I sprayed the shit out of her with bear spray, and then I went on my face and protected the back of my neck.
Another reason, Lance Crosby killed at Yellowstone National Park when I worked there as a paramedic park ranger, and Mark Upton killed in Grand Teton National Park when I worked there as a park ranger and paramedic. And there was also famed bear 399 in the Tetons, taking a walkabout with her 4 cubs in Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 2021. So this is security footage from outside the police station. And the fire department where I work is just about 1 block away. And this was about 2 blocks away from the famous $1 Million Cowboy Bar. Now, can you imagine stumbling out of the cowboy bar and running into 5 grizzly bears? I think I might have been there that night. And there's also all those voices of protest that we hear when we think of introducing grizzly bears to a place like Washington State's North Cascades. But here's the thing. What if that's not the whole story on bears? What if the main time and only time grizzlies make the news is when they do something bad? What if there's a secret life to grizzly bears that many of us don't know about? So if you remember that bear I started with, that ferocious bear of myth and movie, well, I'd like to show you another aspect of that bear as we meet Bart the bear and his owner, Doug Seuss. You might have recognized Bart the Bear from the movie The Edge or that documentary with Brad Pitt. And I spent the afternoon with Doug and Lynn Seuss and their bears. They live in Heber, Utah, which is about a few hours from Jackson Hole. And when I asked Doug what drew you to grizzlies, he told me I was drawn to their immense capacity for deep, profound thought. Viscerally and emotionally, bears are these big, powerful animals with cognitive thought. They're calculating, as smart as an ape, and as diverse in personality as any individual with mood swings. And when I asked Doug what the bears had taught him, he said, "What haven't they taught us?" Before growing more thoughtful. They taught me the importance of our planet, this beautiful hanging ball. I learned that being with wild spirits increases the fever you have for saving the planet. So today we're going to go on a journey that kind of mirrors my own, from being conflicted about having bears on the landscape and not sure if I was a bear person, to being an advocate of respect for these animals and their place in the ecosystem. So S. Devlin, who's from England, she made this beautiful illustration, and she has this quote that I love that says, "When we learn the name of a species, we conserve a place for it in our imagination." So grizzly bears and brown bears are the same species, Ursus arctos. So I use the terms interchangeably throughout my book. So a little bit about me. I grew up in New Hampshire, and I was camping in a portable crib, right from the beginning. When I was 6 weeks old, my parents had me camping. And as you can see, I was always in love with bears, beginning first with my teddy bear. So family camping trips was always some of my happiest memories growing up. And it was during a family camping trip that I encountered my first bear in the wild. So we were at Moose Brook State Park, and we'd gone out for a walk after dinner. And as we walked, I began to sense the presence of a bear. It was kind of like an animal ESP, extrasensory perception. And we approached a strand of bushes, and I knew the bear was behind it. So what did I do? I did the one thing you should never do. I approached the bear. As I did, I heard a low growl that told me, "Don't come closer." So what did me and my family do? We did the second thing you should never do. We ran, and in doing so, we mimicked prey. As for our black lab, McGee, how did he compare to other dogs like Old Yeller and Sounder? Well, he took off faster than all of us. He left us high and dry. It was as if he knew the old adage, you don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than the people you're with. So in the following years, I had some more bear encounters. And again, this was in the East Coast, so they were black bears. And oftentimes when we'd camp, we'd go to the town dump. And as night would fall, we'd watch the bears feed on the garbage. And this was before we really realized that a fed bear is a dead bear. So black bears were cool, but when I saw Thomas Mangelson's iconic photo of a brown bear at Brooks Falls feeding on a salmon, I fell in love with grizzlies. So it standed to reason that once I was hired by the National Park Service, I chose a park with grizzly bears, Yellowstone. And it was there that I encountered my first grizzly bear in the wild. I'd gone out for a trail run, and as I approached Morning Glory Hot Spring, I saw a grizzly in the distance crossing the Firehole River. Frantic, I grabbed my radio and called dispatch. "Dispatch, there's a grizzly bear near Firehole River, near Morning Glory Hot Springs," I said. The dispatcher asked me, "How close is the bear?" "It's about 100 yards away, ma'am." "Are people approaching the bear?" I looked closer. "No." "Is the bear approaching people?" "No, ma'am." What followed was a sigh, and I could literally hear the dispatcher say, "You mean to tell me you called 911 dispatch to tell us that there's a grizzly bear in Yellowstone National Park?" So I was mortified, and making matters worse, my radio transmission was broadcast all across the Old Faithful district to every park ranger. So I think of Grizzly Confidential as a love letter to Bear 399. And has anyone out there heard of Bear 399? Well, she's a famous bear here in the Tetons, and she's what Mike Fitz and others would call a gateway bear. She's a gateway to the bear world for many people, and she's a celebrity bear. And through her, we learn about some of the challenges that bears face. The documentary on the left is actually playing on Delta Airlines right now, the in-flight entertainment. So as I mentioned, 399 took her walkabout around Jackson Hole, and she began appearing everywhere where I recreated. She was on Josie's Ridge where I trail ran. She was on Munger Mountain with her cubs where I mountain bike. She was even behind Albertsons where I grocery shop. And so I thought I liked bears, but now that I was sharing space with them around Jackson, I really became conflicted and scared. And I thought I was a bear person, but it didn't seem like I was. So is 399 an anomaly, or is she sort of a herald that's predicting things to come? And what we see here, this is the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We see the monitoring area in yellow, and then we see the bears pushing out beyond the national park. So this is the new normal, that grizzly bear conservation in the lower 48 is a modern success story. And so 399 is not alone, and this is kind of the new normal, that grizzly bear conservation, the forefront of that is in places like Jackson Hole, Missoula, Big Sky, and sort of these towns on the fringe in that wildland urban interscape. So I was conflicted, and as a firefighter and paramedic, I've been trained to go into those areas that scare me. So I decided to embark on this journey to learn everything I could about bears, see if I could understand them, and answer the important question of how can we coexist, which is how I ended up on Kodiak Island in Alaska. So you land in Kodiak, and then many times you have to take a seaplane to get to a bear camp. And that's how I found my wife and I walking up the Uganic River one September afternoon. So it was a beautiful day. We're walking hand in hand. And just then, 2 cubs spilled out from the sedge, 5 yards to our right. The cubs of the year were adorable with honey-colored fur, fluffy ears, and white natal rings around their neck. But Megan and I had more pressing thoughts. Where's Mom? Just then, a large sow reared up in the tall grass behind the youngsters, dropping a fish from her mighty jaws. It was a surprise encounter with a sow with cubs at close range on a food source. If one was to pick a most likely to get mauled scenario, that was it. Not good, I whispered to Megan. My sympathetic nervous system kicked into overdrive. Adrenaline and cortisone fizzed through my veins. One part of my brain screamed, "You're going to die, run," while another part said, "Stay cool and calm. Respect the bear, and the bear will respect you," the elders of Kodiak have preached for millennia. Like a lot of indigenous wisdom, the mantra seemed so simple and linear when I first heard it. But the more I thought about it, the more complex, cyclical, and way beyond my comprehension it became. Torn between fight or flight that morning, Megan and I chose a third option. We froze. To our relief, the bear didn't attack. To be honest, I hadn't really expected her to. My journey into the secret life of brown bears had already taught me that everything I thought I knew about them was wrong. So for instance, I thought they were ferocious carnivores, but I came to learn they're more correctly described as opportunistic omnivores that eat a wide variety of food, and many of them are vegetarian and pescatarian. I thought they hibernated, but unlike the Arctic ground squirrel, whose temperature drops to around 27 degrees Fahrenheit, brown bear's temperature only drops about 12 degrees. So it's more correctly described as torpor, a series of sleep-wake cycles, and they can arouse almost instantly if they perceive a threat. I also learned bears had superpowers. They could see smells wafting up like campfire and smell time. So if you think about it, scent denatures at a given rate. So a bear can come across a game trail and know if that animal went right or left, but also based on the denaturing, it can know how long ago that animal was there. So they can smell time. Despite their size and strength, brown bears are still surprisingly vulnerable. They too have kryptonite, humans, fellow predators, bipeds, and omnivores who compete for the same land and resources and hold the fate of grizzly bears in their hands. "Hey, bear," I said in a soft but firm voice. Standing tall and sniffing the coastal winds, the sow glanced around before dropping back down on all fours and picking up the fish. "Let's back up slowly," my wife Megan whispered. The two of us walked on, glancing over our shoulder until we finally reached Hiram, our guide, and the boat. As we did, I felt a trigger surge of elation. By all accounts, our bear encounter had been a resounding success. We hadn't stressed the family unit or changed their behavior, and most importantly, we hadn't been charged. "I've been watching wildlife for 40 years, and that experience beats all the others," I exclaimed. So that was a pivotal moment for me. And I think of this book as a journey to deprogram my mind from the cult of the killer bear. And that was the first crack. And this idea of respect the bear and the bear will respect you, that's a theme in the book, and its meaning to me changes over time. And so with that, we will open it up to questions. And I just thought that would kind of be a good little intro to get the conversation going.
Yay! Thank you, Kevin. I feel like one of the best things about Book Club is, well, there are many, many wonderful things about Book Club. The primary one is all of you. But after that, one of the best things is that we get to meet with authors and hear them read their work in their own voice, and what a treat. So thank you for introducing it that way. You are among bear people, and so I hope we all have some good questions. You guys don't be shy. Kevin knows that some of us that we're at different stages of reading this book, and that's totally fine. There's no such thing as a dumb question. So please feel free to ask your questions. You can ask a question by raising your hand, either in real life or in Zoom. And you can also ask your question in the chat, either anonymously or with your name attached. So we've got Naomi, Lori, Narit, and then Holly. And feel free other people to join in. Naomi, you're first.
Yeah, I have two questions.
Can you do one question at a time so we have room for everybody, and we'll come back to you.
Sure. The first one's really short. It's about the little bear that's the drawing in his book, and if it's a specific bear. But the main question I wanted to ask, the most compelling chapter to me was the chapter on McNeil. And to me, McNeil seemed like a transformative place for you. And I related it because it's the kind of transformation, it took me months, but am I right? Tell me more about the 4 days that seemed to transform you.
Sure. Well, for those that don't know, McNeil is a bear and wildlife sanctuary about 250 miles south of Anchorage. And the bears there have never been hunted. They never have been collared for research. They've never accessed human food or garbage. So people exist as sort of like anonymous elements on the landscape. And the viewing there was pioneered by Larry O. Miller, who was a manager there for over 30 years. And 10 people can visit every 4 days. And when you visit, you take the same trails at the same time most every day, and you bear view from about the same two spots. And so the bears have come to rely on this predictability. And what we found is when the humans are predictable, the bears in turn act predictable. And so prior to Larry O. Miller working there, people thought brown bears were these unpredictable, ferocious creatures. And he showed that they can have a predictable response. And he kind of showed to me, McNeil, all the elements of coexistence crystallized there, and it showed what's possible. And so when I went a few years ago, I talked to Beth Rosenberg, and I said, it's amazing. How do you manage the bears? And she said, we don't manage the bears at all. We manage the people. And so when you think of bringing McNeil back to Jackson Hole or Missoula or wherever you live with black bears and other bears, we can't necessarily limit visitation to 10 people, to a place like Yellowstone, but we can take that idea from McNeil where manage the people and you can have this coexistence. And so the special part for me with McNeil was learning that, and also just these amazing encounters with bears. We never approached the bears, but if we were seated as a group and a bear wanted to approach, we would allow the bear. And so just these close encounters and being able to observe their behavior and their big, goofy personalities, it was really amazing.
And Kevin, do you want to answer Naomi's first quick question about the drawing of the bear?
What drawing are you referring to?
And throughout the book, there's a bear.
Oh, right. Yeah, sure. I'm not sure who actually drew that.
Oh, it reminds me of Bear 901. I was just going to say that.
Oh, yeah. I should ask the publisher. And
yeah,
one thing, when the publisher wanted to include photos, we kind of ran into a challenge because I'm describing how beautiful and majestic bears are, but I'm not a professional photographer. And so my photos didn't capture what I was talking about in words. And so luckily I was able to connect with Peter Mangolds, who is in the Yellowstone area, and he's a great photographer and friend of mine. So he provided photos of bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And then I also got some bears from a professional photographer, Jennifer Fogel, and our time overlapped at McNeil. And so she provided the McNeil bears and the Katmai bears and also the Kodiak bears.
We love those insights. Thank you. Lori, your question, you're up next.
Yeah, I was agreeing with what Naomi was saying, that it seemed like McNeil was kind of the turning point for you, where you had this 180-degree change in your attitude towards bears. It seemed like that's when it kind of really hit you. But just so I'll kind of pivot to something else. You must have been extremely saddened at the death of Bear 399. I had to laugh when early on she was, broadcast as going through your neighborhood and you were running around to get the bird feeder in. It was kind of funny thinking of that. But it's amazing how one bear can change so many lives and so many attitudes about bears. And it's just got to be an incredibly different feeling knowing she's not there in the ecosystem. But I'll ask another question. How did you decide on the title?
To be honest, I read Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, and I thought it had a nice ring to it, Grizzly Confidential. And then I was also, what I've realized is the book I want to write oftentimes is similar to the book I'm reading for pleasure. And so I was reading books like, The Soul of an Octopus, or Susan Casey's books. She has one on dolphins called Voices from the Sea. And she has, Ben Goldfarb has the book on beavers titled Eager. So I was reading all these books where they take a detailed look at a certain animal and kind of show that secret life of the animal and their importance of the ecosystem. And so I thought, I'm living here in Jackson and I have this, conflicted feeling about bears, but at the same time, I love them. And so I decided to kind of go into that. And that's kind of how I found the title.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then one quick thing on 399. Her death was felt really deeply in Jackson, and the town square. I don't know if any of you have been there, but there's antler arches that are famous, and elk shed their antlers every year. So some people see that and they think, it's from hunters, but they naturally shed their antlers. And after she passed away, there was a memorial under the antler arch at the town square, and kids wrote letters and lots of people brought flowers, and she was a part of the fabric of the community as much as the Tetons. You know, she's really part of the community. And so there was like a deep sadness without her around. And, you know, Doug Seuss says brown bears, they kind of awaken that your sense of awe when you look out on the landscape. And just knowing that 399 wasn't there anymore, it kind of lost a little bit of its shine. But, you know, we look to the positive, and her death, she was hit by a car. And for those of you that don't know, she raised 18 cubs across 8 litters along the roadside of Grand Teton. And possibly she did this because she was displaced by more dominant bears, but maybe she was just a very clever mother bear that knew if we use the human shield, those older adult males may not predate upon her cubs. But anyways, so yeah, we felt it deeply here.
Thank you, and thank you for remembering her. Narit, and then Holly P.
Okay. Before I ask my question, I'd like to say that I loved your book. The way, you know, you managed to interweave the scientific information, your personal journey, your personal story, and your strong plea for conservation and coexistence with bears, really, it was simply phenomenal. So it made the book, for me at least, and I'm sure for everybody else, very informative, fun to read. I loved your humor, you know, beside the very serious stuff, and very believable and very convincing. So there is so much about this book that I love and would like to ask questions about, but I have to choose one of them, right? So
Choose one now, and then we'll come back to you later.
No, I chose.
Yeah. You're doing great.
So I actually loved the concept, the idea, the mantra, as you call it, how to exist with bears, and maybe also how to stay safe around bears. Respect the bear, and the bear will respect you. You know, it seems to be very straightforward, right? You respect, they respect. But I thought about it a lot, and I don't think so. In my opinion, as much as it is a fundamental, you know, best approach to coexist with bears, I think it's very complex in terms of interpretation and application of it. So what does it mean to respect a bear? So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. I also loved your quest, your walk to find out if you were a bear person. And in my opinion, to be a bear person is a blessing. Not only you enrich your well-being, your mind, your soul, it helps understand the value of and the importance of coexisting with the bear. So I was wondering if being a bear person and knowing how to respect the bear are kind of preconditions for humans to be able to understand what coexistence is, to be able also to contribute to it, to be active, to have it. So the coexistence, is it, like, I would love to hear your thought about coexistence. If this, you know, a bear person and knowing what it means to respect a bear, you really need that to be able to do that. Because I think that coexistence, if it is when you enter the bear's territory, there is a certain coexistence there. But then if the bear enters your territory, like eating your garbage, it's a different coexistence. So there, I will stop talking.
Sure.
Honestly, I loved your book.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm thrilled you enjoyed it. And Now, I won't give away the ending for people who haven't finished the book, but I am a bear person, and bear people are the best. They're just the friendliest, most compassionate, adventuresome people out there. So it's great to be in the company of bear people, and I'm a bear person. So as far as some of your thoughts, respect the bear. I won't give the actual definition that I discover at McNeil, but one of the ways that we can all respect the bears is, securing our food and garbage. And over the course of my travels, I learned that bears are always kind of measuring the caloric return from the energy expended. So if they can have easy access to garbage, bird feeders, beehives, they're going to do that over those natural foods because it takes less energy. So I think one of the big things to coexist is just securing your attractants. And it has to be a community-wide effort. So if my wife and I have, a bear-resistant trash can, but our neighbor across the street doesn't, it's not going to really work. So you really need that community buy-in. And there's a whole sociological aspect that, getting the message out, which is, I think, why a lot of biologists wanted to talk to me. Sadly, people don't necessarily give scientists and biologists their respect these days. So maybe telling the same story through a book might help get the word out. But so one of the things with respect the bear is, I feel if we want the bear to respect human space, and the behavior of bears is very plastic, they can be taught to respect human space. We also have to respect their space. So I live here in the Tetons and close to Yellowstone, and I know where all the bear hotspots are, but now I don't necessarily hike there anymore. I love to watch bears, but I'm going to respect their space in the same way I want them to respect my space. I'll hike in other areas where there might be a bear, but it's not, Two Ocean Lake in the Tetons or, some of these bear hotspots. So I think it has to go both ways. And one of the things Larry Altmiller talked about was the animals and the people that thrive are the ones that share. And so, sharing the landscape with bears and all the animals and the flora beneath them. And then what I learned at McNeil from Beth Rosenberg, it's so fun not to always be apex as a human, not to always be number one, but to, just share the space on equal level with the animals and everything else.
I loved that quote from Beth. Thanks, Narit, for that great question. And you guys, I'm sorry to be a stickler about questions. Once we get through everybody, we'll circle back and people can ask more questions. Okay, Holly and then Cynthia.
Thanks, Kevin, for being with us. I got introduced to you on the National Park After Dark podcast that you did in August. And so then I read the book, and then I'm like, oh my God, the book club has to read this book. So that's how we kind of got onto it. So that's great that you started going on podcasts to help with getting your book out there. My question for you is that we are all 100%, 1000% passionate about bears. There's lots of ways we can help out. Do you have a couple top recommendations is it financial donations? Is it volunteering? What would be your recommendation for us as a book club to help our bear friends?
I think, donating can help, but I think just having the conversations with all different types of people, people who don't like bears and just kind of help spread the message, because we all love bears. And so, we're kind of preaching to the choir, but have those conversations. And I think one of the hopes with my book was it would encourage discussion, because especially here in the lower 48, it's really isolated, and, communities, like biologists aren't talking to the hunting community, who's not talking to the wildlife viewing community. So I want to encourage that kind of discourse. And so that was my hope, that each chapter is kind of a lens to view bears. So I think, having those conversations, and again, the sociological aspect. And I learned this when I went to that human bear conflict conference in Lake Tahoe. The social media side of things is really important, as we've seen from the bear cam at Katmai. And so if you do visit a place, maybe you share the photos and you talk about your experience, that, hey, I encountered bears and it ended well. My hope with the book is to kind of tell a different narrative, because all we hear are the bear attack stories.
Very true. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think, sadly, with our current administration and the cuts, we all sort of need to let our voice be heard to save national parks, beyond the bears, just because I do feel, the staffing cuts. And when I worked in Yellowstone and Grand Teton, even 2015, it was already understaffed, and every park ranger had like 4 different jobs. And if I didn't leave the park on my day off, they'd be knocking on my door to run 911 calls. So even back then it was understaffed. So I think, kind of continuing the support for the Park Service and the Forest Service, and then by extension the animals within those Park Service units.
You're here. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Kevin. Cynthia, then Birgit.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks so much for joining us today. It really is a pleasure. I wanted to let you know, you spoke on this a little bit. We talked about the chapter where you and your wife went to Kodiak Island with the others. And I think Naomi started this discussion, but we all agreed how brave you were and how most people couldn't do that. So I just wanted to touch on that. But I also wanted to ask, I haven't finished the whole book, but today I was reading the chapter about the Craighead brothers. And I wanted to know how that impacted you and what you thought about them advancing bear science, because I know there was some controversy back in their day with the biologists and administrators, but to me, it was just amazing what they did. So just how they impacted you.
Well, yeah, John and Frank lived the most amazing life, and they did all this work with bears, but they also did work with birds, and they have books on wildflowers, and they even helped, I'm forgetting which branch of the military, but just survival, so they worked in all these different areas. And I think the one thing amongst the many things that they did with bears was with the collaring, we learned about their huge range. And so this idea that if we want to, protect bears and manage bears, it can't be just at an agency level. It has to be at an ecosystem level. So the Park Service has to work with the Forest Service, who has to work with towns like Jackson Hole. And then, just to connect the ecosystems, because in the lower 48, bears exist on these ecosystem islands. And so that's just one key that I think is really important that they did. And I spent the day with Carrie Gunther at Yellowstone. And one of the important things, which I'm pretty sure was in my book, the effect of climate change on bears. And so a quick example of that is the white bark pine. Bears love the seeds or the nuts. Yet the mountain pine beetle kills these trees. And in Yellowstone, historically, the pine beetle wouldn't survive through the winter, but with warming temperatures, they are. And so how that relates to conflict is, between August and October, if there's not a lot of white bark pine seeds or nuts for the bears up high, they're going to be in the lower elevations, causing bear jams, in the communities of like the Canyon District, Old Faithful. So the conflict will tend to go up. So it's just really interesting, that connection that, Carrie taught me about climate change and natural foods and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you.
Cynthia, and everybody else, I just reread that chapter this morning too, the Craigheads chapter. One thing that I really liked about that chapter is that I have not read anything by the Craigheads. unlike some people, Birgit. But I have not read anything by the Craigheads, but I felt after reading that chapter like I understood the Craigheads better. So thank you for
agree.
that.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, I didn't entirely answer your whole question. That basically they used to feed bears, you know, at Yellowstone. And in my slideshow, I have this, it's a picture called the lunch counter for bears, and there's a sign and there's bleachers. And so the Craigheads, they wanted to close the dumps. This was in the late 60s gradually. And the Park Service wanted to close them immediately. And, you know, the Craighead said, if we close them immediately, we're going to lose a lot of bears. And the Park Service said, it's a sort of intergenerational species, and the sow is always teaching the cubs. So in a way, they were both right. There was that high mortality of bears initially that the Craigheads feared, but then also that behavior wasn't taught to the younger bears. So they were both right. And one thing with my visit to Yellowstone, and even just grizzly bear recovery in the lower 48, it's a conservation success story. So with endangered species, it can get kind of dark with climate change, a lot of negative, but this is a success story that, you know, we can do it as humans. If we work together and we prioritize the right things, we can bring a species back. And then also at a place like Yellowstone, in the late 60s, you know, there's bears getting into garbage, you know, there's lots of injuries. However, we've put bear resistant trash cans all around and in the backcountry, and there's hardly any conflict these days, and there's hardly any, you know, injuries or deaths. So it really is a success story, and we just got to keep on it. You know, as Carrie Gunther says, it's just this forever thing we'll need to do, but it works. And so I think ultimately the bear story is a positive one.
I love hearing that.
Birgit, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say briefly that there is at least one study that was done in Sweden that found that sows who raise their cubs close to human habitation raise more cubs successfully. So the authors believed that that was actually a strategy by the sows, that they were actually choosing to raise their cubs close to habitation. And I don't remember who the authors were. But my question for you was one about changing attitudes. And that is, you know, with Bear 399, it was before she had the quad, so maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Wyoming was going to issue 10 hunting permits. And one person, call him a person, came out loudly and said, I'm going to get one of those permits and I'm going to kill 399. And now you're telling me that when she died, there was great mourning. And I'm just wondering, has the attitude changed over the last few years, especially as she has brought fame and probably also money into the communities in Wyoming as people come to see her? And as the other bears are also around the roadways, 926 and 610. I'm just wondering whether you feel like attitudes are changing there, or whether there's still, well, I assume there's always going to be a small cadre, but anyway, that's my question.
I do think attitudes are changing amongst the general public, and, you know, unfortunately, there is still a strong anti-predator sentiment, you know, here in, you know, Wyoming and Idaho. And, you know, Dr. Chris Servine, who led the recovery of the grizzly bear, he was always he always wanted the bears to be delisted from the Endangered Species Act. But now he's kind of done a 180, and he says we shouldn't delist them because he doesn't necessarily trust the management on the state level. And he's sort of my barometer. You know, I interviewed him multiple times, and, you know, one thing that really made me realize that didn't even have to do with bears. It had to do with wolves. And last winter, this snowmobiler near Jackson ran over a wolf, and he didn't kill it, and he brought it into a bar.
We saw that one.
Yeah, it's a really sad story, but the states, Wyoming, it's still legal, and they're standing up for running over wildlife with a snowmobile. So I think some of those anti-predator beliefs, they're hard to change. And again, my book is sort of a lens, bears from many different angles. And so the hunting chapter, I was conflicted about putting that in there. But my hope, the thing I realized with people who hunt bears is anyone who's spent a lot of time with bears in the wild, they've always stopped hunting them. Willie Fulton, who's a famed, seaplane pilot in Kodiak, he used to hunt them. And Larry Van Dale, he wanted to hunt them, and he didn't hunt them. So anyone who spends time with them, they change you, and you really realize, hey, this is like a sentient creature. And so the hunting chapter, I don't think anyone's going to read my book and want to hunt, but my hope is the hunting community might, bring this book into their household, because I gave them a voice, but they'll probably read the book, and my hope is they'll say, hey, we should coexist with these animals. They don't need to be hunted. So I'm trying to sneak my way into that anti-predator community and, show them the full aspect of bears. And, a lot of people ask my thoughts on hunting, and I currently don't support it in the lower 48, just because the ecosystems aren't connected, like I mentioned. There's already a high mortality on bears, whether they're hit by cars or, there's some of these vandal killings where people don't like bears, so they just kind of shoot them and let them lay. And then there are some bears that are, removed by management just because they are getting into human food. So they're already food stressed and displaced. So I side with, Chris Servine on that. And, I don't believe it would be a good idea for the bears. So anyways, I'm apart from that, I do think on a whole attitudes are changing. We just have to reach that small but very vocal group of the anti-predator folks who don't like wolves and don't like bears.
I think that incident where the guy brought the young female wolf with her muzzle tied up into the bar, and I'm pretty sure everybody here has seen that one, that generated outrage. And it generated outrage on a very large scale to people who normally wouldn't have seen anything like that. And I think that incidents like that, when publicized, can possibly help a lot.
Yeah, and then another thing, I tried to show the challenges that the ranching community faces, but there's also solutions that as a community, if I want bears on the ecosystem, I should be willing to help, that rancher put in that electrified fence or maybe get a Carillion bear dog. He shouldn't have to bear that cost himself. The community should support him. And some of those attitudes are changing, like outside of Yellowstone, in the northern district near Gardner. I think it's called Tom Minor Basin. And I haven't been there, but there's a ranching community there that coexists with grizzly bears. And I forget what they're feeding on up there exactly, but you'll see just bears feeding on the roots, and then you'll see cattle in the distance. And, so it is possible even at a place like just outside of Yellowstone where there are a lot of bears and cattle.
Chris Morgan talks about that in one of his podcasts, if anyone's interested.
Thanks, Birgit. There are 3 hands raised, so if you want to get a question in, now is not a bad time to raise your hand. Elizabeth, then Marley, then Marcia.
I think you are muted.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
Like Aretha, I have several questions in my head.
Only one for now, please.
I know.
One at a time.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you to comment more on the concept of, quote, dancing with bears and the predator-prey balance way of managing an ecosystem. And in the book, you talked about when you have both that are healthy, like when that predator is healthy, it controls the other. Anyway, I just want to hear you talk about that and the KBDs as a tool for bear management, Karelian bear dogs.
Sure. Well, I think when you talk management tools, there's no one size fits all. And, when you even look at bear behavior, bears in the greater Yellowstone behave a lot differently than those well-fed coastal brown bears. So I think it's good to have a variety of management tools, and certain tools will work in certain places. And the Karelian Bear Dog program, with the Wind River Bear Institute, one of the biggest levels that program works on is just public outreach. Some of the dogs, they're just great ambassadors and they're friendly with a lot of people. So, Nils and Carrie Hunt, they'll bring the dogs into the community, and, kids will pet the dogs, and it's a gateway to begin the conversation. So they help in that respect. And, they can do strike work where they're looking for bears in the area, whether it's the wildland firefighting teams. So it's a tool. Occasionally they do the hard release, but as Nils said, which is in the book, ultimately it's not about releasing the dogs to go chase something. It's about educating the people. So kind of that idea that Beth Rosenberg says, managing the people. So it is a tool. And, on Kodiak Island, the woman I spoke with who lives alone in the middle of bear country, yeah, her Karelian bear dog really helped keep the bears out of her fields and her farm, and where she grew a bunch of things. Now, as far as the predator prey, again, I think it's educating people. And one of the things that I learned over the course of my journey is with apex predators, whether it's a great white shark or a grizzly bear, we have almost this like unconscious fight or flight response, sometimes just hearing the word, let alone encountering it. So I think when I first encountered bears in the wild, I was, I couldn't learn because I was just fight or flight. I was in that sympathetic response, but spending time with them and learning about them, I could bypass that unconscious fear, and then I could really enjoy watching them, the behavior, and that dance of dominance between the bears that you'll see, at like Brooks River and McNeil and that type of thing. And so changing minds and attitudes, which we spoke about earlier, some folks, there's the bottom-up approach to an ecosystem, beginning with photosynthesis, and then this idea of the top-down approach, just showing that importance of predators and how they, distribute the prey, and they help manage the prey and abundance and whatnot. So you see how this one animal can really be that ecosystem engineer.
And you said in the book, it helps also because they will go after the sick and weak animals and therefore thin them out in a way better than what humans can do. I was interested in that aspect of it.
Yeah. I think I sort of think of myself as like a citizen scientist to some degree, but I'm not a biologist. And so, I can't really talk at length other than just kind of the idea of that. But one of the things that Katmai and Brooks, which I really saw, was this idea again of them being ecosystem engineers. And you could see, the scat that was filled with seeds, and then, scattering the salmon, which brings, nutrients into the soil and into the trees and everything. So along with that dance of dominance and sort of their big personalities that come out once they've eaten their fill for the day, you really see them just affecting that whole ecosystem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's a great book, by the way.
Oh, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So we've got Marley, then Marcia, Anne, and then Stacy.
Thank you for being with us, and thank you for this book. I was very touched by your last sentence in the book, and also the sentence about Otis coming back. And in thinking about that, I was also thinking about your time spent in national parks, both working and visiting. And we've had many discussions here, and I wonder what your thoughts are about people management at these parks, where it's just seems to be more about people management for sure, but the idea of just overwhelming numbers of visitors coming to certain parks to see the bears. And I wondered what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I think when I first started in Yellowstone, I was basically afraid of, bears and wolves. And I thought the main danger was the animals, and one story I kind of tell was I was at the Old Faithful Ranger Station, and this young, probably like a yearling or sub-adult, came running through by itself and ran past the visitors center. We just saw it run around the corner, and Old Faithful was about to erupt. So there was like 300 people standing around Old Faithful. And so we just turned on the lights and not the sirens, but the lights for the ambulance, just figuring something bad would happen. And we drove over there, and then the bear had seen the people and immediately climbed a tree. And then the tree was immediately surrounded by people. And so initially I thought, I was protecting the two-legged animal people from the four-legged. But what happened there was the people surrounded the bear in the tree, and this bear just wanted to get away from people, and he wasn't able to. And, the visitor there was kind of the aggressor, and we basically couldn't get that bear out of the tree until nightfall. We had to remove the people and cordon off the area, and eventually the bear came down. But to me, that just kind of shows the reversal of what I thought it was and actually what it is. So it is sort of managing the people. And so I guess, as you say, visitation's at an all-time high, and now we're currently losing park staff. So I think one way to do it is to have that reservation system that some parks are doing, get that number and just start to control that flow of people. And, the infrastructure in the parks was created many years ago. And so it wasn't created for millions of tourists, it was created for visitation in like the 60s. And so I think using that reservation system and putting some of those safeguards could improve that human wildlife coexistence, because things do get overrun for sure.
Okay.
And I think people want to help, but you have to make the right thing easy, and you have to make the right thing affordable. So like if there's a place to secure your food right next to your tent, people are going to use it. It's easy, it's convenient, it's free. So you got to kind of do that on a big scale. But people generally want to do the right thing. They just don't always know how.
Thank you.
Excellent. Marcia, then Anne, then Stacy, and you guys, there's still time for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Marcia, you're up next.
Thank you, Kevin. At the risk of boring you, I love the book. I'm really glad you wrote it, and it's probably one of my favorite books about bears. Not just information, because we're well versed here, but the way you present it and everything. I always like to ask authors, what's next? So epilogue to your epilogue in the book, I guess, is there anything that you have on the horizon of what you'd further like to do to study bears, or jobs or volunteer opportunities that you're looking at pursuing? Or in your search, is there another animal in the park system or in North America, wild animal, that you feel also deserves the attention that you've so gratefully expended on our bears?
Well, thanks, Gan, and I'm thrilled you love the book. So along with loving bears, the great joy of this book was it took me to amazing places. So brown bears they're indicators of ecosystem health. And so where there are grizzly bears. It's a healthy ecosystem. So I got to go to these amazing places. And then I also got to just meet wonderful people, passionate people about, preserving our world and protecting our planet. And so when I think of my next project, I think of the animals that I'm interested in, but I also kind of think of like the places I want to visit. And so I love orcas and was thinking that might be a good project, but there's already a few books on orcas. And then I was thinking mountain lions, but I didn't want it to be too similar to this book in terms of, a predator and, where there's Bear 399 and Otis, some of those famed bears at Katmai, with the mountain lions, you have P22, which is a mountain lion that I wrote about that lived in Los Angeles Griffith Park. So I thought of doing that. And then there's a lot of hummingbirds near my house. And I thought, the species is really interesting. It can fly backwards. But Cy Montgomery, who wrote The Soul of an Octopus, they wrote that book. So part of it is you're looking what interests you, but also like the story that hasn't been told. So I'm still looking for that story and just kind of, in the meantime, reading a bunch just for pleasure. Because once you take on a project, I was reading nothing but bear books, which I really enjoyed. But now I'm just kind of reading, like Peter Matheson, he wrote The Snow Leopard. I'm reading his book, End of the Earth, about Antarctica. So just reading for pleasure. So I don't really have a next project, but I'm, just doing some like general research, I'd say.
Thank you. Orcas are also my favorite. Or beluga whales are big and they're endangered. So there's one for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, and then you mentioned volunteering. I have been a chat moderator for the Brooks Bear Cams, and that job is mainly just watching bears and enjoying them and keep an eye on the chat. But sometimes I'm helping interpret bear behavior, helping people understand bears. And at places like Glacier in Yellowstone, the bears aren't necessarily named or numbered in that way, but at Katmai, it's really interesting because you can, make connections that you couldn't otherwise, like when you see a bear stumble onto the camera with a snare around its neck, that just tells a whole story that might not get out there. Or, bears, sows adopting orphan cubs or family units palling around together. So hopefully I can volunteer at Katmai, and I was hoping to maybe volunteer at McNeil, help set up the camp last summer, and I guess they had enough volunteers, but I'd love to, just volunteer and be out there with the bears and help interpret them for others and, kind of share that passion with people that are visiting. Because I think, people arrive at a place like Katmai and they're thinking that they're just these ferocious carnivores, but maybe you can present that other side of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Stacy, Elizabeth, and then Birgit. And you guys remember that I'm going to ask all of you a question in about 10 minutes. So Anne, you're up next. Go ahead.
Kevin, thank you for this book. I love your synthesis of emotion, science, observation, trust. My comment is, I'd like to talk about cruelty. Being an apex predator and our fear of such animals implies a fear of cruelty. In fact, that has very little role here, and you describe beautifully the idea of mutual respect as being such a positive development. I think, though, cruelty is really important when you think about the individual who ran over the wolf and muzzled that wolf and then displayed that wolf to aggrandize himself. I think really important to distinguish that from respectful harvesting of animals by First Nations. I don't think there is much harvesting of bears, but I understand that the First Nations have a really respectful and beautiful harvesting of bison, and combine that harvesting after something like 3 days subterranean, while the meat cooks. They combine that with a wild celebration of the provision by the creator of this wonderful food. So bottom line, our job is to teach apex predator does not mean cruelty.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I think, the difference between the Alutiiq on Kodiak that would historically harvest brown bears, and they'd use all parts of the bear, or the Siberian shaman, they'd use all parts of the bear, and they leave the skull in the woods on a tree facing east as a matter of respect. So comparing that to like today, where in Alaska, bear meat is the one game animal you don't have to harvest. And instead of leaving the skull on a tree facing east, you have to bring it into Fish and Game. So I don't judge one way or the other. It's just on a totally different spectrum, but I do love the idea of, if you're going to hunt the animal, use all parts of the animal. And most of the, like pretty much all the hunters I see around Jackson, they do have that respect for elk, and they're using all parts of the animal as best they can. So, there is that side of it too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Kevin, Stacy is up next. And my question is, one of the things that I think we all loved about your book is your sense of curiosity and your willingness to lean into fear and kind of exploring new ideas. And I find myself, you said yes to so many things, and you have inspired a lot of us to say yes to some of those things. I wonder, what did you want to say yes to? Was there one experience that you wanted to say yes to that you couldn't do or couldn't include in the book?
Well, appreciate that. And I was very curious, and I think my fear of bears hopefully provided some humor in the book, and it was kind of fun to make fun of myself and to watch, to include my wife in the story and have her kind of make fun of whether it's my passion for bears or my fear of them. So I was lucky enough to get many amazing experiences with bears in the wild, and really thank the biologists who, were open to me spending days with them in the field and, writing this book. So I guess I would have liked to include Glacier National Park in there, because that, is a main ecosystem for grizzly bears. And, part of it is you have a timeline when you sign a book deal. And so it's kind of like who you can talk to. And, the biologists are all busy, and, they're out there doing great things. So I would have loved to have gotten Glacier and to told a story about Glacier. And I wasn't able to get up there. And I also didn't know what sort of slant I would take. So I would have loved to include that in the bears. And as far as what I wanted to say yes to, I guess with some of these Alaskan bears, I didn't necessarily want to say yes to some of these close encounters, but they were just in front of me, so I had to say yes to them. But I guess it was, my heartbeat's going like 140, and, I just learned to breathe through it, and also, stand your ground, obviously. And then just, I guess one of the best things for me is, now that I know bear behavior, like Larry O'Miller says, if the bear's not stressed, I'm not stressed. So I know their behavior now and their signs of stress and aggression. And so if a bear is approaching and it's not showing those signs, I can really just enjoy that encounter, because that fight or flight fear is maybe not entirely gone, but it's like volume 1 versus volume 10. So I can really appreciate bears more now, knowing their behavior and understanding their behavior. But I think ultimately I got to go to the many places that I wanted to get to. And, I'd also love to see brown bears, on Hokkaido, in Japan, or I'll probably say it wrong, but the Kamchatka province, in Russia, so it'd be fun to see bears elsewhere. And even in Europe, they're having some of these same problems we are, with bears expanding their range, whether it's Italy or Romania. But it would be fun to bear view in some of those areas.
Great, thank you. So we've got 3 hands raised, and then I'm going to ask the question to the group so that we can let Kevin go by 5:30. So Elizabeth, then Birgit, and then Bruni.
Yeah, I'm asking this question because I think all of us watch the bears at Katmayanexplore.org, and in the past few years, especially the past 2 or 3, we've been through some really, really hard times, losing our favorite bears. So when you start talking about 399, Holly didn't come back, Otis didn't come back, and we lost, 410, right? God, anyway, one of the oldest bears who was actually killed by another bear. So my question is, how do you deal with emotions surrounding this great love of the bears and the huge losses for those who care about the bears when they're gone?
It's hard. I think the one thing I've learned about brown bears is, the minute you think you have them understood, they'll do something that totally changes you. Like you swear that the adult males are going to predate on all the sub-adult males, but then you see a pair palling around together. And so with the loss of Otis and Holly in 399, I think they are so magical that they almost have this sort of like, they feel almost immortal, because they're overcoming these odds and they're so resilient. That to me is one of the joys of watching bears, is just that resilience that they have to continue on and to make their way in this human dominated world. So they feel immortal, but then, they teach these lessons of loss, like Otis or 399 getting hit by a car. And, they're teachers in every sense of the word, like there's this idea that the indigenous communities, learn to eat by watching what the bears eat, so they're teaching us to, preserve our wild places. And then they're also teaching us one of life's hard lessons of like impermanence, and I think what we do is, we can think of how we can better help the bears. So like 399, the lesson there, or the discussion now is, can we connect these ecosystems? Can we use overpasses or underpasses? So her death is promoting change and good conversations. And, it's sort of like life carries on. And so one of 399's cubs, 610, she's now a mother with young ones, and she's kind of raising them by the roadside. So it's sort of like the cycle continues,
Yes, that other bear I met was 402. No, Naomi corrected me. I should know that. But anyway, she was a very beloved bear. And we also lost some other ones that are in the chat. At least they didn't come back, and we keep looking for them.
But yeah, it's hard with, the bear cams, because you get attached to them and you fall in love with them. And then to see that on camera, it's really traumatizing. I'm a paramedic, and, I see that stuff every day, but it's kind of on a similar level, just because you're not used to like seeing it the way you see it on the camera.
One of the worst ones was Grazer's little one that just was so traumatized. You probably know about that, but that was so hard.
Yeah.
And made people stay away, and it's just heart-wrenching. Sorry.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that question. Let's go to Birgit and then to Bruni.
I had a question about three of the people who didn't show up in your book. We just finished reading Will Troyer's book. He was working at about the same time as the Craigheads. But then also two men who raised 2-month-old cubs and had lifelong relationships with them. And that would be Ben Killam and the Bear Center up in North New Hampshire, but also Joel Rosenthal, who has got Rose, the bear that he raised, in the den that he made for her right now. And she's got 3 cubs. And he goes in there every day and gives her a snack and takes photos of the cubs. And I'm kind of curious how whether you didn't know about them or whether they got left out for reasons, things like that.
Yeah, I think the hard part was the more people you talk to, the more people you want to talk to. And, there's so many interesting biologists and personalities in the bear world. And, I could write like multiple volumes. And so I guess one of the hard parts was there's so many people I wanted to interview that I didn't get a chance to interview, so I think luckily their work is out there in other ways, like Will, his book, and Kerry Gunther. I did interview him, but he's got a book as well. So I think that was the hard part, just not being able to interview as many people as I wanted to. And that kind of comes down to, like, to some degree, your publisher, you have a word count. So they wanted this one 75,000 words, but then also like your timelines as far as turning the book in. But yeah, there's lots of folks I wish I could have interviewed, but sounds like their story's getting out and in other ways. So, their story can be told, by other folks.
And we will read those books. And if you do a volume 2, we will read it too.
Right.
Bruni, you have the last question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for being here and for your book. I live in a country where there are no bears, but I'm interested in hear your, it was mentioned during the conversation, bear management, human conflict, coexistence. In my country, there are no bears, but there are two top felines in the ecosystem. At the north, jaguars, American jaguar, this Panthera onca, and at the south, Puma concolor patagonico. The conflict is with livestock or crops or whatever, but not for not for towns or small cities. They attack mainly livestock and crops or whatever. So there are many scientific research groups at the universities developing technology associated with how to mitigate the human and jaguar conflict or puma. What do you think is the state of art in terms of not using dogs or not creating fences or whatever? What do you think is the state of art regarding bear management in terms of technology? And a second question, Stacy, as a volunteer for us, if you can have a wand, it's the magical when you want to when you want to make a wish. If we could hear a wish from you, what kind of application software technology do you think could help farmers or park rangers to manage the bear conflict?
Yeah, I have to plug my computer in real quick. I don't want to lose you. It just informed me I have about 2 minutes left. So hold on 1 second.
We appreciate the extra battery.
Oh, yeah.
And Bruni, thank you for bringing up jaguars and pumas.
Oh, always. I don't have bears.
Yeah, I think whether it's a jaguar or puma, or I was just reading an article on, these women in Tibet, because they have livestock and they have snow leopards. So I think it's really the same problem, just with a different species. And so some of the answers for bears could work for jaguars and could work for pumas. As you mentioned, they can be hard, and they can be costly, whether it's the electric fence or, the Karelian bear dogs. As far as technology, I don't necessarily know like the latest update on what they can use. I think I may have seen an article on using like a drone to sort of, haze a bear out of a certain area. But, maybe Naomi, do you have any thoughts on that?
For example, for pumas, they are using a kind of lighthouse in several fences in the field. So
nice.
Night Guardian is the name, and it's a lighthouse, and the puma runs away just with the light, and it's low cost and very effective. These kind of things, perhaps I'm not sure if a bear can react the same way for this kind of solution, but it's just to know about your experience on the field if there are something like that.
I mean, I don't know of high-tech solutions, but I'm of the mind of using solutions for people management.
Yeah.
And helping
Okay.
people out. In India, there's a lot of that with elephants and conflict with crops. And I think that maybe someone else knows about more technology, but I think that helping people to coexist is, to me,
It's people management, no,
Yeah.
no bear management.
people management. Yes.
Yeah, but the lighthouse, that's a really interesting idea. And I hadn't heard of that, but it might be a good tool we can use for, grizzly bears as well.
Okay. Okay. I'll send a couple of links to Stacy for you. Okay.
Say again.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Bruni, for shedding light on that. Kevin, do you have 5 minutes for me to ask a question to the group, or is your computer going to die?
Oh no, I plugged it in. And one thing I told Stacy is if everyone reads the book and you want to have a follow-up meeting, we can do that. I love talking about bears, and I'm a student of bears, and so I'm always learning. And so if you want to have a follow-up discussion, once you find out how the book ends, and we can also do that.
That is very generous. Thank you so much. I will reach out to get that on your calendar. You guys, we always do this thing when we're lucky enough to have an author with us. And so I hope some of you might be willing to share. Kevin's bibliography reads a lot like our book club reading list. There's a lot of overlap. And so I want to end the meeting by asking you all, how do you think how does this book fit into the context of the other books we've read? Maybe the best way to answer this question is like 100 years from now, when we've finally read all of the bear books there are to read, what will you remember this book for? And we've got 4 minutes. So please feel free to give this gift to Kevin. We're going to go to Elizabeth, Lori, Judy, then Marcia. Elizabeth, you'll need to unmute.
Sorry. I thought this book was really different in that it was personal. It was very relatable, and it was easy to read, and diverse, and so and it was so reality based. Like the fact that you feared the bears could make it come alive for any person who doesn't know that much about bears. So it was very practical, and they gave solutions like the Karelian bear dogs, and also informed us of various ways of managing bears, and then threw in the concepts that that you were giving examples for, like the predator way of balancing the ecosystem.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Lori, Judy, Marcia, and then Birgit.
I will echo what Elizabeth said. I like the diversity and all the different opinions you gathered. The hunting community opinion was good. It's good to have all these different viewpoints put in there, and I enjoyed that. And it is very relatable. When you were scared, you admitted that you were scared, and people can relate to that. So I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for joining us today.
For sure. Thanks so much.
Judy, you were next.
The first word that came to mind when you asked that question was that I thought your approach was very much more humanistic than a biologist's approach or a scientific approach to answering these questions. It was something that any individual, in my mind, could find common ground with and not feel like they were being preached to by a scientist, I guess. I don't mean to diminish the science of it, but it was a very engaging and helpful set of explanations and talks. So I thank you very, very much for that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to try to balance the science with adventure, but also the personalities of the people I met, and but all with the goal of making people understand and love bears.
Thank you.
And Kevin, there are some comments in the chat as well. But we've got Marcia, and then Birgit, and then Naomi, and then we will let you go.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I'll echo the terms that some others have used, which is engaging and relatable. But it was also full of information in a way that was easy to understand and was full of information as opposed to a scientific one. And it was also, as you said, Kevin, it was interesting in the places you went and the people that you talked to, the way you related that. And I use as an example, I forget the exact title, but the one about the 8 species of bears, where she traveled around for different bears. This one was much more relatable in terms of, and drew you in terms of where you went and the people you talked to and the different things you learned from those people and from each place. While there was some overlap, there was like a discovery for you in each of those places, which made each chapter interesting, and a lot more depth than the 8 bears is how I felt about it. But excellent book. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much.
Birgit, and then Naomi.
I felt like I got to meet a lot of the main players in the bear world, in the bear research world, from Ellery at the University of Washington bear research place to Larry Van Dale, who was probably actually the guy who Grant Hildebrand was quoting when he did the research and found the sow with this, who was caring for the young cub who was actually a boar. And that was probably Larry Van Dale. So thank you.
For sure.
Thanks, Birgit. Naomi, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I feel the journey was a great one, and I don't think we had this kind of journey in other books that we've read. And Kevin, you took us to places that I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go on a bear hunt, right? I thought, and to go through you was great. I wouldn't have gone to the showbiz couple because I would have thought that would have been awful, but you opened my eyes to that. And I just think that anyone who would go bear viewing should read your book, because your journey would help them and lead them to the point where they understand that bears communicate to us if we are open to seeing it, and that it is more about our behavior than it is the bear's behavior. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, your comment that they show us reminded me of that painting when I went to the exhibit at the National Wildlife Museum of Art. And one of the paintings called bears the way showers. They show us the way, you know? So cool. Well, if I could play one last video, can I play like a 1 minute video for you?
We'd be grateful.
And then we'll just end with any last thoughts from Stacy. So, you know, we talked about bears and their intelligence, and I'll just show one video from the Washington State University Bear Center that Dr. Charlie Robbins showed me. All right, 1 sec. All right, so here's the bear on the treadmill doing some energetic studies. Just really interesting research they're doing. And then here's a quick video of the bears doing the voluntary blood draw. So they get a squirt of honey water, and then they'll voluntarily put their paw through the fence, and then they can draw the blood and do some of that study regarding, you know, bears put on all this weight, yet they don't get diabetic. They don't get heart disease. And that's Ellery, who I interviewed. So there goes the paw. And then the video I'll end with, and again, thank you for all your time, is we've talked about the intelligence of bears, and there's 2 videos that to me really show it. One is by Vital Ground, and they have this, you can find it on YouTube if you Google electrified deer carcass. So the bear bites the carcass, gets shocked, bites the carcass again, gets shocked, runs away, and then it immediately knows to go right to the source and unplug it. And it was able to make that connection. It didn't fumble around with the wires. It made that connection. And so, you know, Jane Goodall talks about the chimps and using a tool. They insert the stick into the termite mound, and the termites crawl up the stick, and then they eat it. So with this study at the Washington State Bear Center, Dr. Robbins and his team, they suspended a donut. So that's the problem, because the donut's out of reach. And then with each stump, you have a different solution to the problem. So we're going to watch this bear solve this problem. And I want you just to look at him looking at the donut and the various solutions. And you can really see him calculating to make the connection to solve this problem. That one doesn't work. Look at him making that. All right. Whoops. So I just thought that was a fun clip to end with. That really shows their intelligence and just making connections and kind of calculating that distance. So anything else, Stacy?
I think that is a spectacular note to end on. Thank you, everybody, for a great discussion. Kevin, thank you so much for a great book and a wonderful discussion, and for being so generous with your time. I hope we didn't make you late to the airport. But thanks, everybody, so much. Let's give Kevin our thanks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and we may get to, I'll be in touch. Maybe we'll get to talk to you again, but if not, thank you so much. Very grateful.
All right, thanks again. Great to meet you all, and hopefully you can see some bears in the wild sometime soon.
Thank you.
So much, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again. Have a great weekend.